For the third week in a row, NASCAR has completely lost control of its own rulebook. One week, it's a last lap chaos finish that nobody understands. Now, Kyle Larson just got slapped with a race-ruining penalty for a rule he didn't even know existed, because apparently NASCAR officials weren't exactly sure either. At the Circuit of the Americas, Larson was penalized for cutting Turn 3, except here's the problem. Nobody told him Turn 3 was part of track limits enforcement. Most teams assumed only turns 4 through 6 were being monitored. But mid-race, NASCAR decided Turn 3 was off limits too. Larson's response? I didn't even know they were calling Turn 3. And honestly, neither did a lot of other drivers. Even Kyle Busch, never shy about calling out NASCAR's inconsistency, blasted officials for not having a clear rule in place. He wasn't just frustrated, he was right. And this isn't a one-time mistake, it's a pattern. A pattern of NASCAR making up the rules as they go, leaving drivers, teams, and fans completely confused. But here's the thing, this isn't just about one race. This is the third week in a row NASCAR has embarrassed itself. And it's about to get worse. Let's break down exactly how NASCAR turned what should have been a straightforward race into another officiating disaster. At the Circuit of the Americas, NASCAR made it clear that track limits would be enforced in the S's section. Simple, right? Except, there was one small problem. Nobody knew exactly which corners were being monitored. Most teams assumed it meant turns 4, 5, and 6. But mid-race, Kyle Larson was penalized for cutting Turn 3. And his reaction? Complete confusion. He didn't even know Turn 3 was being policed. And guess what? Neither did many other drivers. Because NASCAR never properly clarified it. Larson got slapped with a stop-and-go penalty that tanked his race before he even knew what had happened. But the inconsistency doesn't stop there. Some drivers went off track in Turn 6 without getting penalized. So, was track limits being enforced or not? Because it sure looked like it depended on who was watching at the time. Even Kyle Busch, never one to hold back, said that NASCAR's officiating was all over the place. And it's hard to disagree. This is supposed to be a professional racing series, not a guessing game. And let's not forget, this wasn't the first major officiating issue in 2025. In fact, it's becoming a pattern. A pattern of confusion, inconsistent rulings, and NASCAR making things up on the fly. Which brings us to the bigger problem. This isn't just about COTA. This is the third week in a row that NASCAR's rulebook has been a complete disaster. Alright, so the chaos at COTA was bad enough. But here's the kicker. It's not an isolated incident. For 3 consecutive weeks, NASCAR's officiating has been under intense scrutiny, raising serious questions about the consistency and transparency of their decisions. First, let's rewind to the Daytona 500. On the final lap, a significant multi-car wreck occurred behind the leaders. Traditionally, such incidents prompt an immediate caution to ensure driver safety and maintain the integrity of the race's conclusion. However, NASCAR officials chose to keep the race under green, allowing William Byron to cross the finish line without interruption. This decision left many drivers and fans puzzled, questioning why the usual protocols were seemingly disregarded. Then came Atlanta. In stark contrast to the previous week's approach, NASCAR threw a caution on the final lap due to a mid-pack crash. This move effectively froze the field, nullifying what could have been a thrilling 3-wide battle for the win among Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, and Carson Hocevar. Fans expressed frustration over the abrupt end, especially given the prior week's decision to let the race finish under green despite a similar incident. Now, at COTA, we're witnessing confusion over track limits, with drivers penalized for infractions that weren't clearly defined before the race. This inconsistency has only added fuel to the fire, as teams struggle to adapt to rules that seem to shift without warning. 3 weeks, 3 controversies. Each incident underscores a troubling pattern. NASCAR's struggle to apply its own rules consistently. This lack of uniformity not only frustrates drivers and teams, but also erodes fans' trust in the sport's governance. The core issue lies in NASCAR's application of its rulebook. It's not that the rules themselves are flawed. Rather, The inconsistent enforcement and mid-race changes create confusion and undermine the sport's credibility. Imagine if the NFL altered the definition of a touchdown during the Super Bowl. That's the level of inconsistency we're witnessing. And the most concerning part? These officiating blunders don't just tarnish NASCAR's reputation, they have real, tangible impacts on drivers, teams, and the championship standings. Bad officiating isn't just an inconvenience, it's damaging NASCAR's credibility at every level. Because if drivers, teams, and fans can't trust the officials to be consistent, then what's the point of even having rules? Take Daytona, for example. Drivers know that superspeedway racing is a game of inches, where one decision can change the outcome of the race. But when NASCAR randomly decides not to throw a caution for a wreck that, under normal circumstances, would have stopped the race, it leaves competitors wondering, what are the rules today? Atlanta was the complete opposite. A caution was thrown, but in a way that killed what could have been an exciting finish. NASCAR's logic. Apparently, the crash warranted it. But why didn't the Daytona wreck? No consistency. No good explanation. And now, at COTA, we have track limits suddenly being enforced mid-race. Kyle Larson didn't even know turn 3 was off limits until he got penalized. Kyle Busch straight up called out NASCAR's inconsistency. When drivers themselves don't know the rules, that's a major problem. This isn't just about a few questionable calls, it's about the integrity of the sport. If drivers feel like the rulebook is being made up on the fly, how can they race with confidence? If teams can't plan strategies because penalties are random, how can they compete fairly? At this rate, teams might have to bring lawyers to the track just to decipher NASCAR's officiating. And if NASCAR doesn't fix this fast, fans might start tuning out entirely, because in any sport, the moment people stop believing the competition is fair, that's when everything starts falling apart. At this point, some fans might be thinking, isn't this just NASCAR being NASCAR? I mean, let's be honest, this sport has a long history of controversial calls, vague rules, and selective enforcement. But here's the thing, it's never been this bad, this often. Let's go back a few years. We've seen NASCAR flip-flop on the yellow line rule at Talladega, invent a new restart violation in real time, and enforce phantom pit road speeding penalties with no data to back them up. But what we're seeing now is something different. These aren't just one-off mistakes. It's 3 straight weeks of blatant inconsistency that directly affect race results. And it's not just drivers who are getting frustrated. Fans are noticing too. Social media has been flooded with posts questioning why some drivers get penalized and others don't for the exact same infractions. The inconsistency isn't just confusing, it's making the sport look unprofessional. And that's a problem. NASCAR is already competing for attention in a crowded sports landscape. The last thing they need is fans tuning out because they don't trust the officiating. Because at the end of the day, motorsports are about fairness. You can't have a competition where one driver plays by one set of rules and another plays by a different one. That's not a sport. That's a circus. And if NASCAR doesn't get its act together soon, they might start losing more than just credibility, they might start losing fans. So, what now? Do we just accept that NASCAR's rulebook is a suggestion rather than a set of actual guidelines? Do teams just flip a coin to figure out what's legal each week? Or does NASCAR finally get its act together? Because here's the reality, this is fixable. But NASCAR has to start taking its own rules seriously. Step 1. Clear communication. No more mid-race surprises. If a rule is going to be enforced, every team needs to know exactly what it is before the green flag drops. No more guessing games. No more "we'll decide later" nonsense. Spell it out, stick to it. Step 2. Consistency across the board. Daytona? No caution. Atlanta? Caution. COTA? Confusing track limits. Same situations, different rulings. That's not how professional sports work. If a rule applies to one driver, it applies to all. Period. Step 3. Accountability. Right now, NASCAR makes a bad call and moves on like nothing happened. That needs to change. When mistakes happen, and they will, NASCAR needs to own up to them. Be transparent, explain the decisions, and make improvements. That's how credibility is restored. So what do you think? Is NASCAR's officiating getting worse, or is this just part of the sport? Let us know in the comments. And if NASCAR won't hold itself accountable, then maybe it's time the fans do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into all things NASCAR.